Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because we're taking something that might look, well, a bit like a dense wall of text on paper, the ISO/TR 2591-1 standard on welding terminology, and we're going to completely demystify it. We're going to transform this highly technical document into a clear, living anatomy of a weld. If you've ever found yourself wondering how engineers and fabricators manage to speak the exact same language when building everything from skyscrapers to spacecraft, you are absolutely in the right place.
To keep things moving efficiently, here's our game plan. First, what exactly is welding? Then, we'll look at the anatomy of a joint. Third, humans, machines, and robots. Fourth, controlling the heat. And finally, number 5, when things go wrong. All right, kicking things off with Section 1. What exactly is welding? The core principles of joining materials. Okay, let's dive right into this. Before we can zoom in on the microscopic details of a weld, we really need to nail down the absolute basics. What does it actually mean to join materials together at this level? Well, here is the official standard definition. And, looking at this, there are 2 words I want to draw your attention to. Workpiece continuity. That is the whole ball game right there. We aren't just gluing 2 things together, we are fundamentally uniting them so they act as one single continuous piece of material. Whether we use crazy amounts of heat, intense pressure, or throw extra material into the mix, the goal is always the same: eliminate that boundary between the original parts. Now, what's super interesting here is how the standard contrasts 2 totally different ways of making that happen. Take fusion welding. The heat is so intense that the parent material itself actually melts, puddling together into a brand new cast structure. But then look at brazing. With brazing, the parent materials stay completely solid. Only the added filler material melts, acting almost like a high-performance liquid glue. And because brazing uses way less energy and lower heat, you get significantly smaller deformations in your final product. But hey, just because you can melt 2 things together doesn't necessarily mean you should. And that brings us to weldability. A truly successful weld shouldn't ruin the original material's inherent properties. Think about it. If you take a piece of ultra-high-strength steel and the welding process makes the joint incredibly brittle, well, that material has pretty terrible weldability for that specific process. The ultimate goal is to join the metal while keeping its original intended strength and characteristics perfectly intact. Moving right along to Section 2, the anatomy of a joint, breaking down the weld. With those core concepts under our belts, let's get into the actual anatomy of a joint. We are going to treat these ISO definitions almost like a biological dissection, picking apart every single piece that makes up the whole. Starting our rapid-fire breakdown, we have the parent material. This is literally the foundation of our joint. It's your original workpiece, the core structural element, just waiting to be joined. Basically, everything else we do from here on out acts directly upon this parent material. Next up, we introduce the external elements. You can think of the filler material as the permanent glue. It's that extra metal we add into the joint to fill the gap and give it strength. But auxiliary materials, these are fascinating. They're like the temporary assistants on the job site. Things like shielding gases or flux powders exist for one reason: to protect the super hot metal from the atmosphere while it's in a vulnerable state. They do their crucial job, and then they're gone. They do not become part of the final hardened weld. So when we finally apply that heat, we create the weld pool. This right here is the molten liquid heart of the active welding process. It is incredibly dynamic, just a swirling, glowing mix of liquid parent material and filler material that trails right behind the heat source. And eventually, of course, it cools and hardens into a single solid weld pass. But here's the catch. The heat doesn't just affect the metal that actually melts. It radiates outward, creating what we call the heat-affected zone, or the haze. I kind of like to think of the haze as the collateral damage zone. The metal in this area never turned to liquid, but the intense, radiating heat was still powerful enough to permanently alter its microscopic internal structure. And it's a super critical area because those structural changes often make the haze the most vulnerable part of the entire joint. And knowing this really illustrates why we design joints the way we do, especially when working with sheet metal. You could choose a single welded joint, right? Just approach it from one side. But look at the double welded joint. By welding from both the top and the bottom, you get much more reliable penetration. Plus, and this is the brilliantly engineered part, it evenly distributes the residual stresses inside the metal, which stops the whole piece from warping out of shape as it cools down. Section 3. Humans, machines, and robots, the levels of automation. So now that we know the anatomy, who's actually performing the surgery?
Let's trace this journey from human hands all the way to fully automated factories. The standard defines these steps really clearly, and you can see how the human element kind of steps back at each level. We start at manual, where a human operator holds the torch and does literally everything. Next is partly mechanized. Here, a machine takes over pushing the wire, but the human is still steering. Fully mechanized means the machine handles the movement and the variables, but, a human can still tweak the dials mid-weld if they need to. But once we hit automatic, zero human intervention is possible during the weld. And finally, robotic welding is just that, controlled entirely by programmable robotic equipment from start to finish.
But here is the thing. Regardless of whether it's a master craftsman or a multi-million-dollar robotic arm holding that torch, they both have to follow an incredibly strict recipe. And that recipe is formalized as the Welding Procedure Specification, or WPS for short. The WPS dictates every single welding parameter. It tells you exactly which parent and filler materials to use, the precise electrical current and voltage, exactly how fast to travel across the joint, and even the specific flow rate of your shielding gas. It leaves absolutely nothing to chance. And speaking of parameters, here's a surprisingly fun fact about how the ISO standard codes the physical position of the weld. Under EN ISO 6947, every position gets a two-letter code starting with P for position, but the second letter, it's alphabetical based on how difficult it is. So a PA weld is your basic, simple, flat, horizontal weld, but as you travel down the alphabet to B, C, and all the way down to stuff like PK, the geometry gets wildly complex, like having to weld a pipe completely overhead. Talk about a tough day at the office. That brings us to Section 4, Controlling the Heat. The thermal journey.
We've talked about the materials, we've talked about the machines, but there is this invisible force governing the entire anatomy of our weld, and that is thermal control. Temperature management isn't just about melting metal. It is an ongoing, heavily monitored journey. First up is the preheating temperature. This is where you heat the raw metal up before you even strike an arc, which is absolutely crucial for preventing sudden cracks. Then, if you're laying down multiple passes of weld, you've got to watch your inner pass temperature. That's the strict thermal limit you have to stay under before you can add the next layer. And finally, there's post-weld heat treatment, which is basically the aftercare required to make sure you get the correct final metallurgical properties. And let me tell you, the scale of this heat treatment is massive. Post-weld heat treatment often means slowly soaking the completely finished piece in a giant oven at temperatures between 500 and 600 degrees Celsius for several hours. Sounds extreme, right? But why do we do it? Well, the extreme localized heat of the welding process creates insane amounts of internal tension and stress in the metal. Heating the entire piece evenly up to 600 degrees allows the metal to kind of just relax. It reduces that dangerous internal stress before the piece is slowly, carefully cooled back down to room temperature.
And finally, Section 5, When Things Go Wrong, Imperfections and Defects. So what actually happens when that stress is just too much? When the anatomy of our weld fails, the ISO standard steps in to be the judge. And here we really need to focus on the vocabulary of failure. Now, in everyday conversation, we might use the words imperfection and defect to mean the exact same thing, right? But the ISO standard separates them very strictly. An imperfection is simply any physical deviation from the intended shape, maybe a tiny air bubble, which we call porosity, or just a slight change in the weld's width. But a defect? That carries major structural and legal weight. A defect is an imperfection that is so severe, it formally fails to meet the required quality standard. Which kind of leaves us with this final, really interesting thought to ponder. If every defect is an imperfection, but not every imperfection is a defect, it means the standards themselves accept that tiny, microscopic deviations are just a natural part of the process. So it makes you wonder, does a perfectly flawless, 100% ideal weld actually exist anywhere outside of a textbook? Or is a true art of engineering just knowing exactly how much imperfection a structure can safely absorb? It completely changes how you look at the engineered world around you, doesn't it? Well, thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the anatomy of a weld, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.